Tehran says a recent nuclear deal struck between Iran and the P5+1 group of countries in Geneva will collapse in case of fresh US sanctions.
If any new anti-Iran sanctions are passed in the US Congress, they will in fact put an end to the current negotiations. Such measures go against good faith, confidence building and the path of current agreement and talks. Our position is clear and transparent that if new US sanctions are passed, they will naturally make the negotiations fail.
Marzieh Afgham was taking a question about the new attempts in the US Congress to endorse more sanctions against Iran. She said any efforts to impose extra sanctions on Iran go against the recent nuclear deal in Geneva. US senators have been pushing for a bill for new restrictions on the country. They say the move is aimed at punishing Tehran if it goes back on the Geneva deal. James H. Fetzer is professor with the University of Minnesota, with us now live from Madison. Let's get his comments. Professor Fetzer, immediately after this nuclear deal was reached between Iran and the P5+1, we saw this immense campaign, so to speak, especially by US lawmakers for a need for new restrictions and sanctions on Tehran. One question that a lot of people, at least here in Iran, are asking is why should there be such an attempt when there's a deal and when negotiations are underway to implement that deal?
Well, because Israel and its allies in the Congress want to undermine the negotiations. They're trying to do everything they can to provoke Iran to withdraw. The fact that there are 48 co-sponsors in the Senate is on its face troubling, but I have no doubt that the Obama administration would veto any such legislation were it to pass Congress, and that they would be unable to override the veto. I think it's completely fascinating that the New York Times had a lead story that the U.S. and Iran face common enemies in the Middle East, and that John Kerry, our Secretary of State, as recently as Sunday, has stated that he could envision a role for Iran in the peace conference in Syria. This suggests to me that there's a considerable change in attitude evolving, where American influence in the Middle East is waning, Iranian influence is growing, and there may be an attempt here to realign forces against common enemies in the Middle East, which I would view as very promising.
But do you think that the Iranians or the Iranian government can trust the United States? I mean, a lot of people here in Iran say, based on our past experiences with the U.S., even if we do reach a deal with the Obama administration or any U.S. government, we can't trust the U.S. when it comes to the implementation of any deal. Do you think that's a valid argument?
Well, that's the argument being made by Iran's opponents here, that we cannot trust the Iranians. There's been emphasis on claims that Iran has now activated a new set of centrifuges to increase its capacity to produce enriched uranium. My view is that Iran not only is entitled to enrich uranium for peaceful nuclear purposes, but it's perfectly entitled to possession of nuclear weapons, which of course our own intelligence agencies in 2007, reaffirmed in 2011, concluded was not the case. And of course, the entire world knows that the official policy of Iran is nuclear energy for all, nuclear weapons for none. So the fact is that however uneasy may be the level of trust, there's no alternative to going forward, which I believe at this point is in the interests of both nations.